Hello, hello. Happy Thursday or Friday Junior, as my friend Lee likes to say. We're really pleased to have you all with us here today for this awesome topic, which is how to build inclusive environments for Latinx students, faculty, and staff. My name is Laura González, and I am one half of the Manifesting Inclusion team. We are really excited to be able to offer you this speaker series, as well as some of the other projects that we're engaged in that you might hear about a little bit later. And we're going to, in just a minute, get to introducing our wonderful speakers for today. But for right now, I want to turn it over to the other half of the Manifesting Inclusion team for further introductions.
Hello, my name is Lee Miles, and I'm the other half of the Manifesting Inclusion team. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm excited to be here today. We're going to pass it off to Marisa and Manny in a second, but I wanted to go over a few house rules before we get to our speaker. So, number one, our guests are so excited to drop a million gems of wisdom for you today. So, if you could, please look down at the bottom. You'll see a heart, you'll see some hands, you'll see some claps. If you want to change the skin tone, long press and then slide that over. But please interact and let our guests know how much you appreciate their wisdom and their nuggets today. Second, we ask that you use any pseudonyms if possible. Often we're going to be talking about people or statistics, and people are statistics and topics. So we simply ask that you put any pseudonyms in the chat, or that you engage with us in an anonymous way. And last but not least, we ask that you share this opportunity. So there's a little right-hand arrow at the bottom of the screen. That not only helps spread this message of building inclusive environments for all people, but also how do we manifest a world of inclusion by allowing people to see that you're engaged in professional development opportunities and that you're a part of them. So, if you are ready to engage in this conversation, please leave us some reactions in the chat below. We'll also be able to see your comments at any time. So, now that we've gotten to who we are, we would love to introduce our guests. So I'll pass it over to you, Marisa. If you could please introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Marisa González, and I'm an educator and community activista here at UNC Greensboro. I'm also first generation, and in 2018, I was a notable Latina here in Guilford County, and then in 2021, I also participated in the Latinx Ed Fellowship program that is also hosted here in North Carolina. I can tell you a little bit more that I am also a PhD student in Educational Leadership and Culture Foundations, and super excited to be doing research on affirming and belonging spaces for Latin students in higher education. So super excited to be here with you all today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marisa. And now we will turn to our other guest, Manny Valdez, for his introductions.
Hi, everybody. My name is Manny Valdez. I currently serve as the Assistant Director for the Richmond Scholars Program, which is the top merit scholarship program at the University of Richmond. I'm a Dumbo alumni of UNCG, so I graduated in 2021 with my Bachelor of Arts in History with a concentration in secondary education, and I graduated again in 2023 with my Master's in higher education. Majority of my work right now is around individualized coaching with our Richmond scholars. So oversee around 90 scholars on campus. We do specialized programming for them, advising, and I also work with our faculty mentors on campus. Nice to see everybody.
Wonderful. So I do also just want to say Happy Hispanic Heritage Month to folks. If you're out there viewing and you would if you celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, please feel free to drop us a note about where your cultural roots might be or how you like to celebrate the month. I know sometimes people have questions about what terminology is best to use, like Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine. And I know that there have been some great videos put out recently on LinkedIn that do a good job explaining those basic terms or why people might use them. But I think it's respectful to ask people how they like to be identified. And so I'm going to throw it back over to Marisa and just ask us to tell us a little bit about yourself, including, if you wish to, how you identify your connection with Latino, Latina, Latine culture.
Awesome. Yeah. So, do you want me to share about like my background or?
Sure. If you're comfortable, that would be great.
Yeah, okay, I can share a little bit about my background. So I was born and raised in Greensboro, North Carolina, and my parents immigrated here 30 years ago from Mexico, San Luis Potosí, and they were used to work in the tobacco fields. My parents then divorced when I was 4, and so ever since then, my mom was a single mom. And so for me, going to college was a process that wasn't always automatic, and I think people around me never saw some that I could go to college in many ways, but I always wanted to go to college for some reason or another. Always felt it inside me. And so, even though the process was very difficult, I remember trying to do my FAFSA and asking my counselor, and she would say, "Well, because your parents don't have a social, I don't think you can go." So it was very confusing, but I was like, there has to be a way. So I always tell this story to people that I encounter, but I applied to FAFSA 13 times and not knowing that what you had to do was put 13 zeros so that it could go through, and that you could submit your FAFSA. And so I applied super late to UNCG, I applied super late to FAFSA. Everything was, like, up in the air, but, for one thing or another, everything aligned at the last minute, and I was able to come to UNCG with the full ride and, not pay a single dollar. So, until this day too, I haven't had to pay, any money to get my undergrad, my master's, or my PhD, because of different programmings and because of different things that I've been able to find along the way, but mentors that I've also encountered. And so I'm super excited to talk a little bit more about those things as we continue our conversation. But just to know that the people around you are so valuable and can offer so much wisdom in reaching any dream that you may have. And so, in terms of how I identify, definitely Latina. I think that there has been a lot of, I wouldn't say controversy, but I guess kind of between like students that I talk to too is like, is it Latin? Is it Latinx? Is it Latino? Is it Hispanic? And so um I myself say Latina, Mexican American, uh, but I think that our students identify with a mix. And with the different things that we do here to support Latin students, we go with the term Latin and Hispanic. We include both because we know that it is important to include both because, for one, Latin is Latin America, and then Hispanic, it includes our friends from Spain. So I think it's important to include both.
Thank you, Marisa. I really appreciate that. How about you, Manny? Would you mind telling us a little bit more about your background and your cultural connections?
Yeah, of course. Share similar story to Marisa here. So I was actually born in California, I was raised in Asheboro, North Carolina. So I call that home. I claim that home. And so my parents are also from Mexico. So I'm also the oldest of 7. So I have 6 younger siblings. And so some of them, or my 2 younger siblings after me, have gone through UNCG as well. Have gone through some of those involvements in those different pieces there as well. What I currently do, or some more background about me, or how I got into college and into higher education in general. Similar story with my admission counselor. I had no idea about college, no idea how to apply to anything. I remember my senior year, our admissions counselors, I think halfway into the year, put out a form saying, "What are you going to do post graduation?" And I have only ever worked at a fast food restaurant, so I remember writing in on that space that I was going to be a manager for my fast food restaurant at some point in my life. I worked at Biscuitville. I don't know if people go eat at Biscuitville, but I worked at the Biscuitville in Asheboro. And so I was a crew member. I did all the things. And I was like, one of these days I'm going to be a shift manager. Like, that's what I'm going to do. My parents didn't go to college. Both of my parents I think they both finished. Well, my mom finished high school. My dad finished elementary school back in Mexico before they immigrated here as well. And so I never knew anything about college, never knew about the opportunities or resources. And after I submitted that form, it wasn't shortly after, later on in the day, I got a call saying that my mission counselors wanted to meet with me. And I remember sitting there in their office. They're like, "Can you tell us what exactly you want to do?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to be a manager. I'll have my own restaurant one day. I'll do all these things." And they're like, "Do you know that, your GPA and your what you want to do in life, you could potentially go to college for free?" And so I didn't know anything about FAFSA. I didn't know about all these things. I also identify as first gen, low income. And so with the help of my admissions counselors, I was able to fill out the FAFSA and eventually went to UNCG as well. It's on a full ride, so that was great. Got into all the colleges that I applied for. So I do owe a lot of that to them. Because again, they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, or I didn't know anything about any of the past that weren't something that none of my family members did. So just being here today and being alongside, like what Marisa mentioned earlier, people alongside Marisa, Dr. G, and Lee, there's a lot of people that influenced me, and it really took a village to get to the point where I'm at today. And so my journey here, I owe it to a lot of people. So I'm excited to continue to talk about that more and break that down. And my background, again, I do identify as Mexican American, so Latino, Hispano, those are mainly the ones that we use at the University of Richmond as well.
So there seems to be a huge influx, if we think about cultural context, of folks and this anti Latin culture, especially around colleges and universities, or taking our jobs, which is not real. How do we begin to create inclusive environments specifically for students when there's all this negative conversation from folks that are not a part of the community, that don't support the community, and are not involved in making the community better? But where do we start supporting students? And either of you all can take that one.
I'll jump in here. I think Marisa might have more to say. I think the biggest piece for me, or something that really made an impact on my experience, speaking as someone that navigated college, I think one of the biggest pieces that helped me out was knowing that there was people on campus that did support me. So I know there's people out there that obviously don't support it, or aren't necessarily going to be in your corner, but having people, knowing that there's people on campus either within your community or outside your community, that is going to support you in your journey, that are going to be there to sit down and talk with you, and that actually genuinely care for you. I think I think that's just one of the low hanging fruit there. And I think back to my first day on a college campus, or my first day of classes in general. I had one of the first year seminars that they have at UNCG. And one of my mentors, before he even knew me, well, he's one of my mentors now. At the time, he was my first teacher I've ever had, Dr. Rod Wyatt. I'm sure he's probably on this call listening. He didn't even know me, but he knew that I was the only Latino student in his classroom. He invited Margarita Carcalo, which I'm sure everybody knows, to our classroom that day. And as I sat down in the classroom, I saw her walk in 5 minutes later. And for the whole class, she sat next to me, talking to me, just asking me questions, small things about my life, who I was. And so walking into the classroom, I already felt isolated, because I was, again, one of the only people in the classroom who was Hispanic, who was Latino. And having Margarita next to me kind of brought me back down to earth. It made me realize, okay, there is some people here. And I think it takes a lot as a practitioner, or just as a professional, to, if you don't necessarily identify with a specific group or with someone's identity, being able to reach out to people that do, and being like, hey, it took a lot for I know it's a simple thought to have someone on campus and be like, hey, can you come just join my classroom for an hour or so, sit next to the student. He's the only Hispanic student I have on campus. Just ask him about his, how's he going? How's his transitions? What are some things he's anxious about? And that led to a lifelong mentor on both ends for Dr. Rod Wyatt and Margarita, who eventually introduced me to Marisa too. And so I think it's the little pieces of being able to connect with people on campus, whether or not you identify with that specific group or not.
Yeah, I think that's really great, Manny. And to add on a little bit to that, I think it's creating a strong network of advocates, a group of people that do want to listen to this message and that are your warriors across campus and across the community, right? Because I think it is important to pay attention to these folks, but I think it's not the most important thing because if we continue to pour into those spaces, it's going to drain us, right? And so for example, yesterday we had a voices panel here on campus that is a panel of students that talk to faculty and staff that come, and it's like kind of like an anonymous place, right, where they get to hear about student perspectives, student experiences here on campus. And so now that group of faculty and staff that came, right, are able to then go back to their departments and share and drop those nuggets of wisdom that they learned from students and be able to share some of the things that they learned. And little by little, I think that we get to a better understanding of one another, right? That it's not as we maybe are perceived in the media, but it may be stories of resiliency and stories of like, look, like my parents had to go through these things because of this, and this is why they immigrated, not because like they're trying to do all these other things. So I think it's navigating and starting small, with those small groups that eventually gets bigger by the day, and so um it, it will only get bigger, I think both in Virginia, here in North Carolina, like I went to a Latinx Ed conference last week or the week before that, and I know Dr. G, you were there. And it was just so powerful to see like the demographics, how they're shifting, right? So we only need to start learning more. So I think it's important to build those partnerships even more.
Thank you both for really illuminating the importance of relationships, like not only relationships with folks who, share some of your background or identities or with whom you can feel like some comfort or at homeness, but also, building relationships across groups or being willing to extend yourself to help other people feel welcome. I really appreciate that. And thank you for highlighting Voices, Marisa, as one example of kind of an advocacy effort that UNCG does. And even though it's, framed just as a conversation, I think it is advocacy because it's saying to faculty and staff, you may not know everything about students' lives. Here's a chance for you to listen. And then, as you said, Marisa, kind of take that information back and put it to good use. So I wanted to just open up the space to see if there are other advocacy type efforts that either of you either experienced when you were a student or have been involved in now that you're staff members. Maybe we can start with you this time, Marisa, and then we'll go over to Manny.
I think I absolutely have to start with Chance. I think Chance was a program that that's where I met Manny more closely, but uh, the program that I would have loved and have longed for when I was going through high school and being so lost in many different spaces and places, but finding that community, that now as a master student and as a PhD student, like being able to now see it from this perspective, it gives me now that hope, right? That these students feel like they're seen, like they're valued, and that they have everything that it takes and more to get the education that they want for themselves and for their family and comunidad. And so I would have to say that advocacy program for me is so meaningful because it's also very grassroots. All of us do it on like a extra time sort of basis, not because it's in our job description, but because we have a passion for this project, and that is now a part of UNCG too. So UNCG Chance is definitely a program that keeps on growing and keeps on finding ways to bring in more opportunities for our students and not just like welcome students here in North Carolina, but also students from other states around here. So we continue to grow, but it is something that was built here because a group of staff and faculty had this big dream, right? And so I would say that definitely Chance is one thing that I would advocate for other people to maybe look into and programming wise for their institutions.
Some people may not be as familiar with UNCG as the four of us are. And so I'll just add that Chance is a summer camp for rising 11th and 12th graders who want to just have an opportunity to kind of spend some time on a college campus. And sort of like Manny and Marisa had said earlier, if you're a student who maybe doesn't know that much yet about college, hasn't had as many role models maybe from your direct family or direct community, it just gives you some exposure and a chance to be like, yeah, I could picture myself here, or, you know, to meet peers who might be similar, or to have staff who really, you know, would love to see you explore your college options, you know, actively encouraging you. So I know more about North Carolina because I live here, but I know that other institutions might have summer camps, maybe like Chance or maybe not like Chance, but that's a great example, especially because it pulls together, you know, as a faculty member, I participated in the Chance Camp programming. I know staff like Marisa or Margarita participate, even Dr. Wyatt was one of the founders. And then it benefits students. So it kind of benefits the community all up and down the line there. Thank you for mentioning that. What about you, Manny? What advocacy programs have you experienced or would you like to lift up for us?
I think we could sit here and talk all day long about how much Chance impacts everybody involved, and I'll speak on the undergraduate piece, and I might switch over here to the professional side. But in my undergrad, I think Chance just really laid the groundwork for me in terms of finding my sense of belonging at UNCG. It was that first summer that I was a mentor, and I remember when all the students finally walked into the auditorium and just looking around and being like, this is the most amount of people that I've seen that look like me or share same culture, language as me that I've ever seen in a room. And I remember just looking around and I was almost in tears because I was like, this is so strange. Like I've never felt this outside of like being at like Valdez or like the Quinces and stuff like that. Like you see a lot of people there, but in an educational setting where you were just uplifting each other, it was as a student and then working as a volunteer, it was the impact that it makes not only on you but the people around you. I mean, it's a feeling that is unmatched. And so, as a professional now, I think here at the University of Richmond, as soon as I got here, I knew it was very different coming from my grad school at UNCG. As I was leaving, as UNCG, I think was getting its emerging HSI status, and then coming here to University of Richmond, which is a predominantly white university or institution, and looking at the student body makeup, I don't know what the number is here, but I know it's less than 10% of students identify as Hispanic or Latinx, and then even then, staff and faculty who identify as Hispanic and Latinx, I could probably count them on my two hands that I know. And so the first person that I reached out to was our director for Latinx initiatives on campus. And from that, we were able to form or uplift our staff and faculty of color affinity group. And under that, we were able to create a Latinx caucus to try and bring Latinx faculty and staff on campus together. And so next week, we actually have our first event, and we're doing a little exhibit at a museum. We're looking at one of their new exhibits. It's called the Bordo Cantos exhibit, and it's just highlighting the immigrations coming into Virginia and those different things. But and outside of that, we also host these other small group meetings with students called Café con Leches, and in those we just talk about different pieces of our experience, who we are, our identities, other ways that we can support one another on campus. And it's always good being in those spaces, just talking to the students, because the moment you say, oh, I'm a staff member here on campus, it's almost like a light. You see the light bulb come on in their head. Is like, oh my gosh, like I have somebody on campus that I can go to. I have somebody that I could talk about these other things with. And so I think since I've been here at Richmond, it's been quite an experience trying to navigate and find my community while also trying to show other people, while also being a community for other people, right? And so it's been fun, and our goal here is to try and bring people together as much as possible, whether it's the Latinx community or other communities who are underrepresented here at the university.
We talk a lot about communities as a means to overcome barriers and to create spaces where people feel like they belong, people feel like they're included, and especially in spaces where people feel like they're excluded. And unfortunately, higher education is a place with a lot of barriers, and that could be for students, faculty, staff, or just visitors. So, what are some common barriers that you all see as problems? And what are some tangible solutions outside of those programs? So is it community building? Is it a budget line? Is it a endowed chair? Like, what are the barriers and what are some solutions? And either of you all can go first.
I'll let you start, Marissa. I know your work goes more along with this.
Um, 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 I, I guess I can start. So there are many barriers, right, that our students face, but I think that some of the most pressing ones are definitely financial. I think this past year has been so rough with the new FAFSA, and so I um had to work with a team of staff here and students that were able to support our students, because a lot of our students, once the FAFSA was not opening or it wasn't working because of different reasons, they would come here crying because they're like, I don't think I can come back to school if I can't make this FAFSA work, you know? Or they were making plans not to live on campus anymore and commute for an hour or sometimes 2 hours away because they're like, the only thing my family will be able to afford is the tuition, you know. And so I think here, especially at UNCG, our students that we have pulled here are 95% and more first generation, as well as I think more than 70% of our students receive um, Pell Grants. So the need at UNCG is definitely high. But that is definitely one of the biggest barriers that we see, that that affects everything else, you know. But I think also understanding that like leaving family or commuting and having family still at home and having to navigate both spaces, and how to mention to your professor like, oh, I'm so sorry I can't go because like I have to go interpret for my family, you know. Or even if you're a residential student, like our students are still calling, you know, and being interpreters via phone, you know. And so knowing that they have family obligations is also something that a lot of folks sometimes don't understand, you know, because for other groups of students, college is supposed to be a transition of where like, well, now I'm independent and like it's me and I'm navigating and my friends. But for us, family and community is still something that like we're trying to find here on campus, but we're still, I guess, in some ways learning how to transition, how to continue supporting, but at the same time, finding their way also in this new space in their career of their undergrad. Some of the things that I also see here is like confidence, you know, like knowing that they also have everything that it takes to finish college, you know, because they're like, oh, I'm the first one, like, I don't think I can do this. And just reminding them that they're more than capable of doing this and much more, I think is something that for me always brings me so much joy whenever they get to that point, right? But it does take a lot of process. And so I think something that we've been able to develop here at UNCG is that we don't have like Latin centers per se, right? But we do, and we have created a virtual hub that is called Herencia, which is to celebrate their herencia here on campus and really uplift the assets and the cultural wealth that comes with being Latin and Hispanic, right? Whether that's linguistic, navigational, being able to resist, you know, the different things that have come their way. And I think those are our pillars here, that in everything that we do, we remind them, right, that they, even though maybe they're having a bad day or they're overcoming something in class or something at home, like you have come so far and you will continue to go far because tu herencia, your heritage, you know, is going to give you that. And so I think um our students have really found in many ways like they belong and that they have a community that they can lean on, and they feel like si se puede, right? Because like it's not just like me somewhere else by myself, but like you're coming around with your friends and with staff that also look like you and stuff that maybe doesn't look like you, but also are there cheering you on. And just reminding them, I think, is what makes them feel that they can do this, whether it's financial, whether it's first generation, whether it's anything else that comes their way. I think just coming together and reminding them of their herencia.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pieces that came to mind, and I'll speak more along the lines of my experience, since my work right now currently, my work doesn't directly involve working with Latinx students, and so I think one of the biggest barriers that I think about when I meet with my students now at the university is the barriers of having to balance school and then everything you have going on back at home. So like all your family obligations, and Marisa touched on that. I remember in my sophomore junior years, a lot of my other peers were going on internships, doing these study abroad opportunities, doing all the other things, and my summers were essentially planned to work at home and help out with bills, help out as much as I could, right? And so a lot of those doors were closed for me because I didn't have that option. That wasn't an option on the table for me or my family. I spent most of the weekends going back at home, working, helping out, taking care of my siblings, doing those different things. And so I think one of the things that we want to keep in mind as far as professionals is that those students still deserve to talk about 4-year plans. Those students still deserve to talk through other opportunities for them, either during winter breaks, study abroad during winter breaks, small internships that they can do at home, internships they can do virtual, all those different things. So although they do have all these obligations or different family responsibilities, those students still deserve that same support that maybe someone else is getting, that does have those doors open and do have those summers open. And so that's something that I often think about here in at the university, because we're very privileged and very well resourced in that we do have grants and funds for students to get paid for internships that they don't have if they aren't getting paid for internships, or they don't have housing if they don't have these things. And that's something I think I wish I would have had going to UNCG, but also wanting to recognize that every school and every institution is different in terms of their funding and where all that is allocated. But those students, again, still deserve those same opportunities, whether or not they still have to go with balancing all of their family obligations and everything at home.
Thank you both. I wanted to just mention the Herencia program that Marisa talked about. I found more information about that under the website of the office where she works, and it also included, a whole list of resources for Latinx students and staff. So like there's Alianza, which is a program where faculty and staff who want to support the Latinx students can come together. And we have, I pulled some of those resources together so that we could share them at the end of the day. And I know some of these resources we will have mentioned verbally too. But if you came here looking for some ideas of programs, resources, strategies, things that you could implement on your own campus, hopefully we'll have that list that we can post to the LinkedIn invitation. So I wonder if we think about institutions that maybe are just kind of beginning to strategize and think about Latinx student populations or ways to support them. I know we've talked about, getting people together so they can see others like them, building relationships, helping to meet specific needs, whether they're, financial needs or understanding needs for students to spend time connecting still with their family. But what other steps would you recommend for institutions? And we have represented here today 2 very different institutions, from University of Richmond to UNCG, but we can even think about, like large 2-year community colleges, or, HBCUs or women's colleges. Like there's so many different kinds of institutions. So what advice might you have for institutions that are just starting to think about what they could do to serve their Latinx students? What might be some of the first steps? That was a big, long question. I apologize. But the bottom line is, what advice would you have?
One of the things that we're doing is that we recognize that we don't have a big community here for either staff, faculty, and students. And so I think one of the pieces that we're looking into, or that we're doing, is seeing what is our community doing. So outside of the university, what is Richmond in general doing for Latinx or our Hispanic residents in the city? And so one of the things they're doing this year or this month is a farmers market, specifically for Latinos, just to go and be vendors and share those different things. So this Saturday, Daphne Luna, who's the assistant director for Latinx initiatives, is actually taking shuttles of students to the Hispanic farmers market. And so I think one of the things is to look in your city, like what are people already doing? You don't necessarily have to recreate the wheel or recreate a new program or create a new initiative. There's already stuff out there in terms of organizations, NGOs, or maybe people in the city working on small projects. So I would try looking into the city to see what people are already doing, to see how you can help that out and uplift those programs. And in turn, I'm sure those people will invest back in you and see like, okay, what can we come to your university? Can we come to your university? Can we host this event? I mean, do you want to do a lecture of some sort in the future? So I would start in the city, see what your city's doing.
That is such a brilliant idea. I think universities too often forget that they're located in a town or city.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that up, Manny. What about you, Marisa? Is there anything else you would like to add there?
Yeah, I think that that's great that we actually haven't gone outside of UNC Greensboro, so I think that's a very good idea, Manny. Because I think we have centered in here on campus what kind of resources we can provide for our students, and so I think how we started here is by getting a group of students, the group of student leaders that we have here on campus that maybe are presidents or lead different student organizations. And getting to hear about their concerns and some of the things that they're facing and that they're going through, right? And what will they like to see? Really giving them a place at the table, I think that has been very helpful for us, for them to feel like it's not top down, right? But that they are here with us making these decisions. And that, like, even when it came to making the name of Herencia or like what they want to see, it was like we voted, right? We went through a list of names. We did a lot of brainstorming together, that then it was more than the student leaders, and it was a bigger group of 40 students, and then it was 50, and then they would bring more students, so now we have a group me, right, of students, of more than 300 students that come together, and make decisions and daily put like different resources for them, so I think it is very important to lean on to your students because they know so much more than we know of their needs, right? And so um it's like that's why Herencia, some of the resources that thank you for mentioning that, some of the resources that are on there have been based on the things that they were saying that they want to know more about, whether it's academics, financial aid, academic recovery of sorts, you name it. Those are some of the top things that they said, and we're like, we got you, like we'll get you connected, to these different resources, because in many ways, because we don't have like the funding for a cultural center, there are other resources that we can tap into, right? And that we could refer students to, but sometimes they don't know where to start. And so they can start with us. We refer them out, we talk to them, and we also have other student ambassadors that are federal work study students that are able to also walk with them to these different places on campus. Because sometimes that in itself can also be difficult, right? They're like, I don't want to go to tell them about my grades, and then they're like, no problem. Someone can go with you, or to our accessibility office too. They're like, I don't even know what questions to ask, and so sometimes, as a staff person, I'm like, I think you're trying to ask this, and that. I'll walk up there with you, and then we're able to come to an agreement. We communicate this back to their families because their families want to be involved in the process too. So I think it's a matter of leaning in to our students and connecting our resources that we already have here on campus, and finding a way to bring those together so that students know maybe one centralized place, but then are able to go to different places on campus.
As you were talking, Marisa, I was remembering a time when Manny was in the master's program where I was teaching, and he was again in that spot of being one of the only in the master's cohort. And he said, Dr. G, is there any place on campus you know of where I could hook into something where there are more like students maybe like me? And so I had a friend who was a faculty member who had a research lab called Caminos that was a lot of research around like experiences of Latinx immigrant students. And so, we went over there and Manny had some time available and some opportunities to connect with those folks. But that also just shows how knowing about what's on your campus, so like that students may not always know what faculty member is doing research in something that might also be their passion, but if we can have sort of a sense of who's in our environment and then just know how to make those connections. I know we're getting towards the time where we want to let the audience know that if you have questions for our panelists or comments, please feel free to put those into the chat in LinkedIn and we will bring those questions in as we see them. Let me see if Lee had another follow-up question that she'd like to ask.
Yeah, I had one little follow-up question just about how do we begin to connect. So I even find that now working on a new campus that I have to find people that look like me or that are in the same type of Greek affiliation. But if a student shows up to campus and they don't have those resources like an engagement center or a multicultural center, given the cultural climate around anti legislation, where does a student start? What are the couple of places on campus where you would recommend them to go if it's more of a visible thing, like I see no one like me, especially at the graduate level where we see far and far less diversity?
That's a good question, Lee. I'm trying to think of how I managed or where I was trying to find my community. And I think I still am. I mean, as a second year professional now in my career, I'm still trying to figure that out of like, am I finding the right spots? Like, am I hitting the right people? And am I going to the right places for students to see me? And I think for me, where I started here was like going to the dining hall, going to like different places where students are at, is like meeting them where they're at. And I'm walking around business. I know I look young, and sometimes I'm like, they're like, "Are you a student?" And I was like, "No, I actually work here." But even just going to pockets where they see you and they're like, "I haven't seen that person here before. Like, I wonder what they're about or what they're doing." And I know usually in the first weeks of school, usually around on college campuses, is that they do some kind of like club fairs or different fairs like that. And so going to those things, I think, gives you some exposure to what's being offered around campus. And sometimes it just takes your roommate too, just being like, "Hey, do you want to tag along with me? I'm a little anxious to actually talk to these people or see these people." But once you're able to see those people, you're able to create those connections. But that's a good question, Lee. I think that's something that I think I'm still working through and I guess building a plane as I'm flying it, But I think the biggest piece there is going to those pockets where you do find those people, or going to like departments. So here on campus, we have a department specifically focused for people who wanted to explore Spanish as a major, or land studies, those different things, or Latin America studies and those different things. So it might just be going to those offices or departments and being like, "Hey, like I'm interested in finding community. Do you know of any clubs that you all directly work with, or students that connect with?" So I think, again, on any on-campus resources that you could just walk into and try and see where you can connect yourself out to.
I love that idea of the academic department so much, because we forget that that is why it's so important to think about inclusion with faculty. Is often our faculty are the folks who advise the student councils, who lead the student groups, who create budget lines. And so I just appreciate that so much, Manny.
We did have a question come in, and it kind of relates to this topic too. So I'm going to pull it in, and then I saw you move your mouth, Marisa. So if there was something you wanted to say, you can certainly tie it into. So we have Joshua Burns, who was asked, said, "Hi, Manny and Marisa. Do either of you have suggestions for resources that can support work in building inclusive environments for Latinx students, such as books, websites, podcasts?" And then Joshua specifically works in leadership development, so anything around that would be great. And it just reminded me of seeing Marisa post on LinkedIn about taking some students from ALPFA to a conference. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about that student organization, Marisa, and then the chance that you all had to travel and kind of help them with their leadership development in that organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I have to start by mentioning, and I always love the community culture wealth motto with Tara Yoso. I live and die by Tara Yoso. So if you ever get a chance to read her book, and also some of the other things that she's coming up with right now, I would highly recommend anything from her. I think it's really helped me, even as like a, being a PhD student, like leaning into this is where I learned about it. I didn't learn about it in my undergrad or my master's. And so now that I know that and be able to share with my students, life changing. I think Excelencia is a website too that gives you a lot of important information, but also just like the state of different things. I don't know, Joshua, if you're in North Carolina, but Latinx Ed also provides a lot of great resources here, but that can be applied in many different places too. But in essentially with the trip that we did to Las Vegas, I went with Alpha, which Alpha is the Association of Latino Professionals for America, and I have served as their advisor since they got started. I think it was a time where I was learning what a leader was too for myself. I think, I was like 5 years ago or something. And so we started super small with the group of students, but now this past year, it because they have been able to see in the past, it was self-funded by students, and we would fundraise and we would do many different things in order for students to be able to go. I think it was San Antonio the year before, we brought 20 students, and this year was over 40 students, I think 45. And it was such a powerful experience because students have been able to feel comfortable, in a place where these are corporations that, Bank of America, Deloitte, companies that sometimes it seems like a far-fetched dream of places to work for, but that this conference makes them feel like they're able to go and talk to these different companies, right? And so the conference in itself is a combination of like leadership opportunities and workshops, and then with a couple of days of a career fair that's like from 9 to 3. So students are there, they're able to have on the spot interviews and are able to lean on with each other, right? But I have to give a big shout out to the Bryan School of Business that sponsored our students to go this past year. That without their support and also seeing that this is an impactful experience for their students, we wouldn't have been able to bring as many students, right? And so because we saw such a success rate with students really taking advantage and coming back with offers, this past year we were able to double the number. And so our students, yeah, we brought some first and second year students that it's even more important, right? And I think that's something that we were able to share with the Bryan School here, that we can't just take our juniors and seniors. We have to start preparing them at the first year and second year, right? Because our students, a lot of them are first generation. And so the first time that you go to a career fair cannot be the first time that you go to this trip, right? And so by the time they're juniors, they're prepared to now have this full on interview, right? And be able to ace it with like A plus plus. And so I think it's reminding them that it's an investment, right? We're preparing them today so that tomorrow, when they're juniors, they're more than ready to take on that job. So it's something that we value here, their preparation. And so not just in business, but in also other places as well. So we really do love Alpha and what has brought here on campus to remind our students that are first generation, that need that extra push, that we need to start as early as we can, because sometimes we haven't been able to work on our resumes, or do different things. And so now is the time, not our senior year.
That organization is ALPFA. You can look it up by that acronym, but also in the resource list that I have that we can share at the end, I linked to Marisa's office, the Intercultural Affairs office at UNCG, and ALPFA I know is part of the listings there. In addition to some Greek letter organizations that are Latinx focused, There are other student organizations that Manny might also know or be able to mention that are great for leadership development or, inclusive and supportive environments.
Yeah, I'm trying to think as far as professional conferences too, like when you're going to NASPA, ACPA, those different things. Like if you know of a university, for example, at UNCG, if I know of a university that is doing this and is doing it very well and is bringing these students together, I will make it a point to go and try and connect with whoever their staff or faculty members are who are representing that university during that conference, or even just going on LinkedIn. I know there's always posts. I'm sure you can look up a hashtag like Latinx or Hispanic Heritage Month, those different things, and see what other universities are doing, and see if those kind of initiatives will work on your campus. But yeah, I'm thinking more of the conferences and trying to connect and being able to build your network with those people. Because one of the things I always tell our students or advise our students is talking to people, either if it's your professor, staff members on campus, because their network then becomes your network. And especially in communities like this where we are working with underserved and underrepresented students, I mean, those communities of people, they are doing a lot of work and a lot of empowering work. And so being able to get into those communities and really understand the purpose and the motivation behind actually doing the work is impactful, and you'll get to know all the secrets of how to support those students and how to bring those initiatives onto your campus.
Joshua, we also have the Belonging and Inclusion Leadership Summit. So it's actually as a means here at Wake Forest University, and it's in collaboration with the School of Business. So I will put something up. If you send me a message, I can send you a copy of the flyer, but that's going to be March 13th, 2025. And we're going to be thinking about how do we go against this anti-DEI legislation and really think about inclusive excellence as humanity-based work. So I love that I'm here at Wake Forest University and we love doing those things, but we have a robust leadership framework as well that you can look up online. It's called the RIDE framework, and that should be a great resource to utilize at your own university in thinking about that legislation.
The last thing that I want to lift up, because I know we're coming to the end of our time, is Marisa had mentioned Excelencia, which is Excelencia in Education, another website that's a national organization, but it's also listed on that resource sheet I've been mentioning. And they every year will put out a call for like what works in working with Latinx students in education. And so if you go to the website for Excelencia in Education, or you can find them on LinkedIn, and you can look in their kind of what works database to see examples, as Manny was saying, like what are other universities doing? How can we, borrow, import, build on some of the other initiatives that are already out there? So I think do you want to go ahead and mention our upcoming events, Lee?
Yeah, so before we get to where to find our lovely panelists today who have given a wealth of information, we love these conversations and continue to talk about barriers and how we don't have access to increase that inclusion. Excuse my words today, y'all. We'll be right back here next Thursday, where we'll be speaking with Clarabelle and Bertrand from Hack Diversity. So we'll specifically be talking about barriers in the tech industry. And we know that many of our students of color specifically want to go into tech for the money and utilize those degrees. So please come and join us here. And if you're unfamiliar with Hack Diversity, they specifically work for decreasing those barriers and breaking down barriers that get to equity. And then the following week, we're going to be talking about building inclusive and intersectional environments for the LGBTQ plus community. So as a member of the queer community, we know that there's tons of intersection with people of color, socioeconomic status, ability. And so we want to talk about that during that month. But before we go, we would love if you gave us some reactions for our lovely panelists today. Dr. G, do you have a couple more notes before we close out and allow our panelists to say where to find them?
I just want to say my deep appreciation for both Manny and Marisa, who, as I said, I knew them as students, and now to see them, as professionals, and to know that Marisa is starting her PhD, like I'm just full of appreciation, admiration, respect for you both. And I really deeply appreciate the time that you've shared with us today and the wisdom and kind of you're speaking straight from the heart about your own experiences. So yes, we would love to have you let people know how and where to find you. And so if you have, you know, a LinkedIn site or like a side gig that you want to talk about, a project that you're working on. So let's start with Marisa. Where can people find you if they'd like to know more about you and or your work?
Yeah, so you can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Marisa G. González. And then also, if you want to follow me on Instagram, I post a lot of, I've converted my Instagram into more of a professional Instagram. So you'll definitely find a lot of things that we do here on campus. So my Instagram, MGGONZAL. 4 and so you can follow me there, but also if you want to see more of the student side, you can follow UNCG Herencia, and that's a lot of what we talked about today. You can find a lot of the stuff that we do there too. And so, yeah, feel free to follow us there. And Dr. G, I remember going as an undergrad and passing by your office and seeing your name and always thinking you were my cousin or something because of González. So thank you so much for always being an inspiration and always, always, always being a mentor to many of us.
You can find me on LinkedIn. I know on my name here I go by Manny Valdez, but I think on my LinkedIn I have it as Manuel Valdez Perez. And so if you also look up the Richmond Scholars Program, you'll be able to find me, find my email, and for anything as far as what our university does for Latinx students or other student groups, you can go to the Student Center of Equity and Inclusion at the University of Richmond. You'll be able to find more information there and other programs they do there. But also want to do a shout out to Dr. G and Lee. Thank you so much for setting this up. Thank you so much for thinking of us. And again, piggyback off Marisa, Dr. G, you were a gem for so many people, and it was great to have you in class and to be able to have those meetings outside of you and being able to connect with so many people. So it's great to see you too.
Thank you, Manny. Well, I think that does it for our time here today. Thank you again for joining us in the audience. We hope to see you again in one of our upcoming sessions. And again, we appreciate everyone's investment in making a more inclusive world. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Manny. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
Bye-bye.